My husband's dying whisper, check behind the frames. I buried someone I thought I truly knew. She lived a life many people quietly admired. From the outside, it looked calm, settled, and safe. Nothing about it felt loud or dramatic. It was the kind of life built on routine, shared habits, and small, steady moments that blended into years. People often said she was lucky, and she smiled when they did, believing it herself most days. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. Her marriage seemed simple in the best way. There were no public arguments, no sudden disappearances, no whispered rumors. Her husband was known as a quiet man. He spoke politely, listened more than he talked, and kept his thoughts to himself. Neighbors described him as dependable. Friends said he was private but kind. No one ever had a bad story to tell about him. Their home reflected that same calm energy. It wasn't large or fancy, but it felt warm. The rooms were clean without being perfect. The furniture had been chosen slowly over time, not all at once. Every corner showed signs of a shared life built carefully, piece by piece. The walls were lined with framed photographs. There were pictures from early years together, smiling faces frozen in moments of joy, vacations near the sea, family gatherings with crowded tables, quiet celebrations at home. Each photo felt like proof of a life lived honestly. She often stopped to look at those frames while passing through the hallway. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she felt a soft sense of comfort. These images reminded her of how far they had come together. They told a story of trust, patience, and shared memories. Mornings in the house followed a steady rhythm. Coffee brewed at the same time each day. The sound of dishes clinking softly in the sink. Light coming through the windows just enough to wake the rooms. Words exchanged were few but familiar. Simple questions. Short replies. Nothing felt forced. Evenings were quiet too. Dinner was usually eaten at the same small table. Sometimes they talked about work or plans for the weekend. Other times they sat in comfortable silence. She never felt that silence was a problem. To her, it meant peace. Friends often pointed out how calm their relationship seemed. They said it was rare to see a couple so steady. No drama. No need to prove anything. She nodded when she heard that. Inside, she felt proud of what they had built together. Her husband never liked attention. At gatherings, he stayed close to her side but rarely became the center of conversation. He smiled politely when spoken to, answered questions briefly, and then stepped back. People assumed that was just his nature. She defended that privacy whenever anyone questioned it. Not everyone needs to share everything, she would say. Some people are just quiet. She believed that deeply. Their days blended into weeks, and weeks into years. Life didn't feel rushed. There were routines, but also comfort in knowing what to expect. She trusted that sense of stability more than anything. There were no signs of trouble that she could see. No strange phone calls. No sudden changes in behavior. No unexplained absences. Everything felt predictable, and she found comfort in that. When she thought about her marriage, she thought about safety. She thought about having someone who always came home. Someone who didn't raise their voice. Someone who respected boundaries. She believed she knew the person she shared her life with. Sometimes, late at night, she lay awake listening to the quiet of the house. The soft sounds of breathing beside her reminded her she wasn't alone. That thought brought peace. On weekends, they worked around the house together. Small repairs. Cleaning. Grocery shopping. Nothing exciting, but nothing stressful either. They moved around each other with ease, like two people who knew each other well. The framed photographs continued to grow over the years. New moments added. New memories captured. Each one was placed carefully, chosen for a reason. She liked that they told their story without words. Visitors often commented on those pictures. They said the house felt lived in, loved. She felt proud hearing that. It meant she had built something real. Her husband rarely spoke about his past. When asked, he kept his answers short and simple. She never pushed. Everyone has parts of their life they keep private, she thought. Trust meant respecting that. She focused on the present. On the life they shared now. On the comfort of routine. On the belief that love didn't need to be loud to be strong. Years passed without major change. And that was exactly what she thought happiness looked like. She believed that knowing someone for so long meant knowing them completely. That time itself was proof. That shared meals and shared space created honesty. If anyone had asked her then whether secrets could exist inside such a quiet life, she would have said no. Not here. Not in this house. Everything seemed ordinary. And that was what made it feel safe. She had no idea that ordinary was not always the same as true. At least, not yet. The change came so fast that it didn't feel real at first. One week, life followed the same quiet rhythm it always had. The next, everything was broken into hospital hours, test results, and waiting rooms that smelled of disinfectant and fear. It started with something small. Tiredness that didn't go away. A cough that lingered longer than it should have. He brushed it off, saying it was nothing, just stress or age catching up. She believed him, because she had never known him to be careless. When the doctor finally suggested more tests, neither of them expected much. They sat side by side in the clinic, fingers loosely touching, listening with calm faces. The words that followed felt heavy, like they didn't belong in the room. The diagnosis was serious. The kind of illness people whisper about. The kind that turns time into something fragile. It felt unreal hearing it spoken out loud. Everything after that moved too quickly. Appointments were scheduled back to back. Specialists came and went. Machines hummed and screens flashed numbers she didn't understand. She nodded through explanations, trying to keep her balance. At home, routines disappeared. Mornings no longer began with quiet coffee. Instead, they started with pills laid out carefully on the table. Afternoons were spent driving to hospitals. Evenings ended with exhaustion instead of comfort. She became his caretaker without thinking twice. It felt natural. She organized medications, tracked appointments, cooked meals he could barely eat. She learned how to help him move when his body felt weak. She stayed alert even when her own body begged for rest. He never complained much. Pain showed in his face sometimes, but he rarely spoke about it. He thanked her often, quietly, with a look that held more weight than words. As weeks passed, his strength faded faster than anyone expected. Doctors spoke in careful tones. Some avoided eye contact. Others tried to sound hopeful, but their voices lacked confidence. The illness didn't just affect his body. It changed the air around him. He grew quieter, lost in thought. Not distant in a cold way, but heavy, as if he was carrying something unseen. She noticed it most at night. He stared at the ceiling long after the lights were off. Sometimes he sighed softly. Sometimes his breathing grew uneven. When she asked if he was scared, he nodded but said nothing more. She assumed it was fear of death. That was normal, she thought. Anyone would be afraid. She squeezed his hand and reminded him he wasn't alone. He smiled faintly when she said that, but the smile never reached his eyes. Hospital rooms became too familiar. She learned which nurses worked which shifts. She learned the sound of the machines. She learned how to wait. Family and friends visited at first. They brought flowers, food, words of support. Over time, visits became shorter. Life moved on for them. For her, time stood still. She watched his body change day by day. Weight lost. Skin growing pale. Hands trembling when he reached for water. Each change hurt, but she forced herself to stay strong. Sometimes she caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. His eyes held something close to regret. Or guilt. She couldn't tell. When she asked what was wrong, he shook his head. Said he was just tired. Said not to worry. She believed him, because believing was easier than imagining something else. Late one afternoon, while sitting beside his hospital bed, she noticed his fingers tracing invisible lines on the blanket. Over and over. Like he was trying to remember something. She asked if he wanted to talk. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. After a long pause, he said there were things he wished he had said earlier in life. She told him it wasn't too late. That there was time. She meant it with all her heart. He looked away when she said that. The illness continued its fast, cruel path. Doctors spoke more carefully now. Words like prepare and comfort replaced earlier plans. At home, she barely slept. She listened to every breath, afraid of the silence. Fear became a constant companion, sitting quietly in her chest. She felt exhaustion in her bones, but she didn't stop. Love pushed her forward. Duty held her upright. He thanked her again one night, his voice barely above a whisper. He said she had given him a good life. She laughed softly and told him they were still living it. He didn't respond. As days blurred together, she sensed that something else was there. Something unsaid. Not anger. Not distance. Just wait. She told herself it was the illness talking. That pain made people quiet. That fear made people strange. She had no reason to think otherwise. The life they once knew was gone now, replaced by machines and medicine. But she held on to the belief that love was still enough. She had no idea that the silence she mistook for fear was carrying something much heavier. And time was running out. The final night arrived without ceremony. No dramatic moment marked its beginning. It simply settled in quietly, like everything else had during those last weeks. The room was dim, lit by a small lamp near the bed. Machines hummed softly, steady and cold. His breathing was shallow now. Each breath sounded like effort. She sat beside him, holding his hand, afraid that letting go for even a second might mean losing him forever. He had been drifting in and out of sleep all day. Sometimes his eyes opened, unfocused. Sometimes his lips moved without sound. The nurses said this was normal. She nodded, pretending she understood. Her body felt heavy with exhaustion. She hadn't slept properly in days. Still, she refused to leave his side. This was where she belonged. She spoke to him softly, even when he didn't respond. She talked about small things. The house. The weather. Familiar memories. She hoped her voice might anchor him. At some point late in the night, his fingers tightened around hers. The pressure was weak, but intentional. She leaned closer immediately, heart racing. His eyes opened slowly. For a brief moment, they focused on her face. There was recognition there. Awareness. She smiled through tears and told him she was there. That she wasn't going anywhere. His lips moved, struggling to form words. She leaned in further, bringing her ear close to his mouth. The room felt unbearably still. His voice was barely a whisper. Thin. Fragile. As if the words themselves were breaking apart. Check behind the frames. The sentence was so unexpected that it didn't make sense at first. She pulled back slightly, confused. She searched his face for clarity. What? She asked gently. His eyes fluttered. His grip loosened. For a moment, she wondered if she had imagined it. She assumed it was confusion. The medication. The illness. People often said strange things near the end. She had heard stories. Still, the words echoed in her mind. Check behind the frames. She tried to laugh it off quietly. She told him everything was okay. That he could rest. That there was nothing to worry about. His breathing changed again. Slower now. More uneven. She pressed the call button for the nurse, panic rising. She whispered his name, begged him to stay awake. But he didn't respond. The nurse arrived quickly. Then another. They spoke in calm, practiced tones while checking monitors and pulses. She stood frozen, holding his hand, watching faces that already seemed to know the outcome. Time stretched painfully. Seconds felt like minutes. Then the room went quiet in a different way. A final stillness. Someone spoke softly. Words of confirmation. Of sympathy. She barely heard them. Her world narrowed to the hand in hers. Still warm. Still familiar. He was gone. She stayed there long after the nurses stepped back. Long after the machines were turned off. Long after the room felt too empty. Her mind replayed his final words again and again. Check behind the frames. They didn't feel like nonsense anymore. Not exactly. They felt deliberate. Chosen. But what could they mean? On the drive home later that night, the streets were empty. The house greeted her with silence. A silence deeper than any she had known before. She dropped her keys on the table and leaned against the wall, suddenly unable to stand. Grief came in waves. Sharp. Overwhelming. Unfair. She cried until her chest hurt. Until tears stopped coming. When she finally moved, she walked slowly through the house. Everything looked the same. Too normal. Her eyes drifted to the hallway. The framed photographs lined the wall just as they always had. She stopped. The words returned, uninvited. Check behind the frames. Her heart beat faster. She shook her head, trying to clear it. It was nothing, she told herself. Just the rambling of a dying man. A symbolic phrase. Maybe he meant memories. Or holding on to the past. Still, unease settled in her chest. She went to bed without checking anything. Sleep came in broken pieces. Each time she closed her eyes, she heard his voice again. Not loud. Not emotional. Just clear. Check behind the frames. By morning, the words felt heavier. Less like confusion. More like a message left unfinished. She avoided the hallway as she moved around the house. Afraid of what she might feel. Afraid of what she might find. Grief demanded her attention. Calls to make. Arrangements to plan. People to inform. But through it all, the sentence stayed with her. It followed her through the day. Through condolences. Through quiet moments alone. She didn't understand it. But she couldn't forget it either. Something had been placed in her hands in those final seconds. Something she wasn't ready to face yet. For now, all she knew was that the man she had loved was gone. And his last words refused to stay silent. After the burial, time seemed to slow down in a strange way. The world outside continued moving, but her own days felt heavy and stretched. Each hour passed quietly, without shape or purpose. The rush of hospitals and urgent decisions was gone, replaced by stillness that felt louder than noise. The funeral itself passed like a blur. Faces appeared and disappeared. Voices spoke words of comfort that sounded distant, as if coming from underwater. She nodded when expected. She thanked people when they spoke to her. Her body went through the motions while her mind stayed somewhere else. Flowers filled the room for a few days after. Cards were stacked neatly on the table. Messages arrived on her phone, one after another. People promised to check in. They said they were there if she needed anything. At first, she appreciated it. Then, slowly, it began to fade. People returned to their lives. Messages became less frequent. Visits stopped. The house emptied of noise again. She was alone now. Returning to the house after the funeral felt harder than she expected. The door opened to silence so deep it pressed against her chest. No familiar sounds greeted her. No soft movements from another room. Just still air and memories. She left her coat on the chair and stood there for a long moment, unsure where to go. Every room felt wrong without him in it. Grief settled into her days quietly. It woke her in the morning and followed her through the house. It sat beside her while she ate meals she barely touched. It waited for her at night when sleep refused to come. She moved slowly now. Simple tasks felt exhausting. Some days, she didn't open the curtains at all. The house felt larger without another presence. Hallways stretched longer. Rooms echoed more than they ever had before. She avoided certain spaces at first. The bedroom. The chair where he used to sit. The places that still carried his shape. But the hallway was impossible to avoid. Each time she walked past it, her eyes drifted to the wall lined with framed photographs. The same photos that once brought comfort now stirred something else. Unrest. At first, she tried to ignore it. She told herself she was imagining things. Grief played tricks on the mind. Everyone said that. Still, the words returned. Check behind the frames. They surfaced when the house was quiet. When her thoughts wandered. When she stood alone in that hallway. At night, the phrase echoed louder. It slipped into her dreams and followed her when she woke. She began to notice details she hadn't before. How evenly spaced the frames were. How carefully they had been arranged. How some of them had never been moved in years. She stopped in front of them more often now. Studying faces frozen in time. Smiles that suddenly felt unfamiliar. She searched the photos for clues, though she didn't know what she was looking for. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. Days passed. Grief dulled into something heavier and quieter. The sharp pain softened, replaced by a constant ache. And with that ache came questions. Why those words? Why then? The phrase no longer felt like random confusion. Not anymore. It felt deliberate. As if he had chosen it carefully, saving it for the end. She remembered the look in his eyes that night. The brief moment of clarity. The way he focused on her before speaking. That memory unsettled her. If it had been meaningless, she felt she would have forgotten it by now. But instead, it grew stronger. She tried distracting herself. Cleaning the house. Rearranging drawers. Sorting through paperwork. Anything to stay busy. But no matter what she did, the hallway pulled her attention back. Sometimes she stood there for several minutes, staring at the frames without touching them. Her heart beat faster, though nothing had changed. Fear crept in quietly. Not fear of ghosts or superstition. Fear of truth. She wondered if there were things she had never known. Things hidden in plain sight. That thought felt like betrayal. To him. To their life together. She pushed it away again and again. At night, she lay awake replaying memories. Conversations. Small moments. Searching for signs she might have missed. Nothing stood out. Nothing obvious. That was what made it worse. The house continued to feel heavier each day. Silence filled every corner. Even familiar sounds felt wrong now. One afternoon, sunlight hit the hallway just right. Shadows formed around the frames, darker than usual. She stopped walking. Her chest tightened. The words returned, calm and clear. Check behind the frames. This time, she didn't shake her head. She didn't brush it off. She stood there, heart racing, realizing something had shifted. The phrase wasn't asking. It was waiting. Still, she didn't act. Not yet. Grief had taken enough from her already. She wasn't sure she was ready to lose something else. But deep down, she knew the silence in the house was no longer empty. It was holding something back. And sooner or later, she would have to face it. The decision came quietly, without drama. It wasn't courage that pushed her forward, and it wasn't fear either. It was something in between. Curiosity mixed with exhaustion. A need to quiet the voice that refused to leave her alone. The house was dim that evening. Outside, the sky had already darkened, and the rooms felt closed in. She moved through them slowly, turning off lights she didn't need, until she found herself standing in the hallway again. The frames watched her in silence. She stood there for a long moment, arms crossed, heart beating faster than it should have. She told herself she was being foolish. Grief did strange things to people. Everyone knew that. Still, her hand lifted. She chose a frame near the middle of the wall. One she had walked past 1,000 times. A photo from a family gathering years ago. Smiling faces. A day she remembered clearly. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted it off the hook. The wall beneath was lighter, untouched by years of air and light. She turned the frame over. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Just cardboard backing. Dust along the edges. She felt a brief wave of relief, almost disappointment. Then she noticed the tape. It was old but carefully placed, running cleanly across the back. Too deliberate to be accidental. Her breath caught. She peeled the tape away slowly, afraid the sound might somehow be too loud. Behind it was an envelope, thin and yellowed with age, pressed flat against the frame. Her name was not written on it. That detail alone made her chest tighten. She stared at the envelope for a long moment before sliding it free. Her hands felt numb now. Cold. She sat down on the floor, back against the wall, the frame forgotten beside her. The envelope opened easily. Inside were folded papers. More than one. Thick, official-looking documents that had been handled many times. She unfolded the first page. Her eyes scanned the text slowly. Lines of typed words. Stamps. Dates. Then she saw the name. It was not the name she expected. She read it again. And again. A different name entirely. Her heart began to race. She flipped through the other pages, panic building with every word she recognized and every detail that felt wrong. There was an address she didn't know. A city she had never visited with him. Dates that stretched far back into a time before they met. Her mouth went dry. She tried to make sense of it. Tried to connect the words on the page to the man she had lived with for years. Nothing fit. These weren't random papers. They were official. Legal. The kind of documents that carried weight. Her hands shook as she laid them out on the floor, one by one. She felt like the ground beneath her had shifted. Memories rushed through her mind. Conversations. Small moments she had never questioned. Gaps she had accepted without thought. A cold realization crept in. The man she had buried might not have been who she believed he was. Her stomach twisted. A mix of disbelief and fear washed over her. She pressed her back harder against the wall, as if the house itself might collapse. She whispered his name aloud, hoping it would ground her. It didn't. Instead, the unfamiliar name on the paper echoed louder. Her sense of safety cracked. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't grief playing tricks. It was something real. Something hidden. She gathered the papers with shaking hands and placed them back into the envelope. She didn't know what to do next. She only knew that nothing felt solid anymore. The hallway no longer felt like part of her home. It felt like the beginning of something she had never agreed to face. She looked down at the empty spot on the wall where the frame had been. For the first time, she understood. The whisper hadn't been random. It had been a warning. And this was only the first frame. She did not sleep that night. The envelope stayed on the table, unopened but present, like something alive. Every time she looked at it, her chest tightened. The house felt different now. Not louder. Just unfamiliar. By morning, the fear had changed shape. It wasn't sharp anymore. It was focused. She returned to the hallway slowly, as if stepping into a place she no longer owned. The frames were still there, perfectly aligned, unchanged. And yet, she knew better now. She reached for the next one. This time, there was no hesitation. She removed the frame and turned it over. Her hands were steadier than before, though her heart wasn't. The back looked the same as the first. Cardboard. Dust. Then tape. Her breath left her in a slow, silent exhale. Behind the frame was another envelope. Different color. Same careful placement. She sat on the floor again, opening it with practiced movements. Inside were papers filled with numbers. Bank statements. Accounts she didn't recognize. Transfers made regularly, quietly, over many years. She stared at the amounts, trying to understand. They weren't small. They weren't accidental. This was planned. She leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. Her thoughts raced, but none of them landed anywhere solid. She stood up and moved to the next frame. Then the next. Each one held something. Letters written in a handwriting she recognized, but addressed to people she didn't know. Polite words. Familiar tone. Conversations that stretched across years. Photographs came next. People standing beside him, smiling the way she had seen him smile 1,000 times. Different places. Different homes. Moments that had never included her. Her hands shook as she held one of the photos longer than the rest. He looked relaxed in it. Comfortable. Like someone living a life that fit him. Not the life she knew. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Every frame held a fragment. Carefully chosen. Carefully hidden. Spread across the house like pieces of a map. Her stomach turned. This wasn't panic. It was clarity. She moved down the hallway, frame by frame, laying their contents out on the floor. Papers formed small piles. Photos stacked unevenly. Letters slipped from envelopes and landed where they fell. The house watched her in silence. The longer she looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't one mistake. This wasn't one lie. It was a whole structure. Built slowly. Maintained quietly. Protected by routine and trust. The man she married had lived another life alongside hers. Not briefly. Not secretly tucked away in a moment of weakness. Fully. She thought back to all the times he had been busy. All the trips that had sounded reasonable. All the gaps she never questioned. They fit now. Every unexplained absence had a place. The hallway floor filled with evidence until there was no room left to stand. She felt dizzy. She pressed her palm to the wall to steady herself. The home that once felt safest now felt exposed. Like walls made of paper. Like she had been walking through it blind. She wandered into the living room, then the kitchen, seeing everything differently. Every corner felt like it might be holding something else. Something unseen. She realized then that the frames were not random. They were intentional. They were reminders. Markers of a life that had always been there, hiding behind smiles and silence. Her chest tightened with something sharper than grief. Betrayal. Not loud. Not angry. Cold. She sank into the couch, surrounded by pieces of a truth she had never agreed to carry. Her mind tried to protect her, pulling her back toward denial. But denial had nowhere left to stand. This wasn't a secret kept from fear. It was a life kept from choice. She thought about how carefully everything had been arranged. How no frame had ever fallen. How nothing had ever been disturbed. It was hidden in plain sight. And she had walked past it every day. The realization hurt more than the discovery itself. She hadn't been fooled by intelligence or skill. She had been fooled by trust. By believing that quiet meant honest. She gathered the papers slowly, stacking them into some kind of order. Her movements felt distant, like she was watching someone else. She didn't cry. Not yet. Her grief had changed shape again. The man she lost was no longer just gone. He was unknown. She looked back down the hallway, now stripped of its frames. Bare patches marked the walls like scars. This house had been a map all along. She just hadn't known how to read it. Now she did. And the truth it pointed to was bigger than she was ready to face. There were still frames left. Still pieces missing. Still answers waiting. She understood then that the whisper hadn't been an apology. It hadn't been comfort. It had been instruction. And she had only just begun to follow it. The days that followed felt unreal. Not fast, Not slow. Just heavy. She kept the documents close, stacked neatly on the table as if order might bring understanding. Each morning, she woke with the same thought pressing against her chest. None of this was finished. Not even close. Grief no longer moved quietly. It collided with anger now, with questions that refused to stay unanswered. She began with the names. There were more than she expected. Written on letters. Printed on records. Signed at the bottom of pages she still struggled to believe were real. Each name felt like a door she had never known existed. Making the first call took nearly an hour. She sat with the phone in her hand, staring at the number until her fingers went numb. When she finally pressed call, her voice almost failed her. The person on the other end sounded surprised. Not shocked. Just cautious. They knew him. Not the man she had married, but someone close enough to recognize her description. The name she spoke was the unfamiliar one from the papers. The line went quiet for a moment. Yes, the voice said slowly. I knew him. The words hit harder than she expected. She ended the call soon after, unable to keep listening. Her hands shook as she set the phone down. That night, sleep didn't come. She spread timelines across the floor. Dates of trips. Gaps in memory. Events she had accepted without question. Now she placed them side by side with documents and letters. The overlap was impossible to ignore. He hadn't disappeared. He had relocated. She felt foolish for not seeing it sooner. That thought hurt more than the lies themselves. Another call. Then another. Some people refused to speak. Others shared just enough to confirm what she already feared. He had been careful. Consistent. Never careless. The life she uncovered wasn't reckless or chaotic. It was structured. That realization brought a different kind of pain. This wasn't a man running from mistakes. It was a man managing identities. She found photographs online. Old records. Traces left behind that she had never been meant to find. The pieces formed a picture she didn't recognize, yet couldn't deny. Anger rose in waves. How could someone live two lives so completely? How could he look at her every day and keep so much hidden? Then guilt followed close behind. She questioned herself endlessly. Wondered what she had missed. What signs she had ignored. Whether love had made her blind. She hated those thoughts, but they came anyway. At times, she defended him in her own mind. Told herself people were complicated. That fear could drive anyone to hide. Other times, she wanted to tear the documents apart and scream at the empty rooms. Her emotions refused to stay in one place. She mourned him all over again. Not just the man who died, but the version she thought she knew. And yet, memories still held warmth. The quiet mornings. The shared meals. The gentle care during ordinary days. Those moments had been real. That truth confused her most of all. He had loved her. Of that she was certain. The tenderness had not been an act. The concern in his eyes had not been false. But love, she realized, had not made him honest. She sat alone one evening, surrounded by evidence and memories, trying to hold both truths at once. He had been real. And incomplete. That was the hardest thing to accept. She wasn't angry that he had a past. Everyone did. She was angry that he had taken her choice away. That he had decided what she was allowed to know. Trust, she understood now, wasn't just about loyalty. It was about truth. As days passed, her grief shifted again. Less sharp. More reflective. She stopped asking why and began asking how she would live with what she knew. There were no clear answers. Only the quiet understanding that love could exist beside deception. And that reconciling those two things would take time. She gathered the documents and placed them in a box. Not to hide them, but to acknowledge them. They were part of her story now. So was he. She stood in the hallway one last time, looking at the bare walls where the frames had been. She felt older than she had before. Wiser, but not stronger. Just changed. The truth had not freed her. But it had found her. And now, she had to decide what to do with it. The days that followed were quieter than she expected. Not empty, not heavy in the same way as before. Just still. The storm had passed, but the air felt different. She stopped chasing answers. Not because there were none left, but because she finally understood that knowing everything would not change what had already happened. The truth had shown itself. That was enough. She packed the documents carefully and placed them in a single box. She did not destroy them. She did not hide them away in shame. She labeled the box and put it where it could be found. This, too, was part of her life now. The house no longer felt like an enemy. It felt tired. Like it had carried too much for too long. One afternoon, she brought the frames back out. She wiped the glass slowly, one by one. Dust had gathered during their time off the walls. Her reflection stared back at her, older and quieter, but steadier than before. She hung them again in the hallway. Not all of them. Only the ones that mattered to her. Moments that had been real. Smiles that hadn't been rehearsed. Days that had held meaning, even if the truth behind them had been incomplete. The frames no longer made her feel safe. They made her feel honest. She understood now that comfort and truth were not the same thing. Some evenings, she walked the hallway slowly, letting memories come and go without fighting them. She allowed herself to remember him fully, not as a perfect partner, not as a stranger, but as a complicated human being. She stopped asking who he really was. He had been many things. A man who loved quietly. A man who hid deeply. Both were true. Accepting that did not excuse what he had done. It did not erase the betrayal. But it allowed her to stop carrying the weight of confusion. She forgave herself first. For trusting. For not seeing. For loving without suspicion. That forgiveness brought more peace than anything else. Slowly, she began rebuilding her life. Not in big ways. In small ones. Morning walks. Meals eaten without rushing. Conversations that didn't revolve around the past. She learned that strength did not arrive all at once. It grew quietly, the way her old life once had. Sometimes, she still felt sadness when she passed the frames. Other times, gratitude. Both were allowed. She understood now that truth does not always arrive in time to protect us. But it can still set us free. Not by changing the past, but by changing how we carry it. She kept the frames. Not as symbols of comfort, but as reminders. That people are complex. That love can be real and flawed at the same time. And that even when truth comes too late, it still matters. As she turned off the lights one night and walked toward her bedroom, she paused in the hallway. The frames were still. So was she. For the first time in a long while, the silence no longer felt like something hiding. It felt like space. And in that space, she was finally free.